Hey there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Scene to Screen Movie Podcast. I'm Kieran, that's AJ.
How's it going?
And in this episode, we're going to be ranking our top 5 films set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're doing this episode now for a number of different reasons. First of all, we wanted to get this episode out there before Avengers Infinity War was released and broke every record in the history of records ever. Secondly, Black Panther just came out, so we wanted to see how that film might have modified our top 5s. And finally, the Marvel Cinematic Universe turns 10 years old this year, so we really just wanted to celebrate the franchise as a whole. Before we jump into our top 5s, I just want to talk for a second about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because for me this is a franchise that actually means a lot. I remember seeing the first Iron Man film in cinemas when I was around 13, I think. And since then, this franchise has grown to become one of my all-time favourites. I've seen every film on opening night, I buy all the merchandise, all the pop figures, all that nerdy crap. So it's fair to say that I'm a massive fan of this franchise. But jumping over to you for a second, what was the first Marvel film you saw, and what's your overall opinion of the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Mine was Iron Man 1, like way back when it was kind of like first out, but not in cinema, I saw it on DVD. But I really, really liked it. And then for some reason, I kind of just stopped watching Marvel films for ages. There was a period where I kind of missed a lot of the films that were out in cinemas, and I was kind of watching old stuff or whatever. And then I started catching up on all that, so I just started from Captain America, the First Avenger, and just went on from there. And I really like it as a universe. I think that the way they've built the universe is really impressive. But on a sort of film by film basis, it's very kind of hit or miss for me. Usually I end up giving them like a 7 because they feel like, they entertain me for the most part. But then there's kind of like sometimes feel they're a bit generic, but there's almost always a couple of elements from each film I really, really like. So often it's the villains, I'm not going to lie. There are just certain villain performances that just raise the films. But like we were saying, Black Panther, I really liked the themes and the way they put them across. So it's kind of I wouldn't say love-hate thing. It's more like, just like occasional dislike sort of relationship for me.
So moving on to our top 5 Marvel films, Marvel Cinematic Universe films, should I say. And I guess we should start by letting you guys know that me and AJ haven't come up with a shared top 5. What we're going to be doing is each taking it in turns to talk about one of our films. So we'll start as usual with AJ. What's your 5th favourite Marvel film?
Cool. So coming up, number 5 for me is Thor Ragnarok. This film just felt like such a welcome change from the other Thor films and from a lot of the other Marvel films. It was the first Marvel film that kind of felt like this is the work of a director and not just a studio. I just thought the humor really worked for me, as it has worked in previous Taika Waititi films. I like his comedic style. I like the way that he used improvisation to bring out the best in the actors. Jeff Goldblum is hilarious. The fight scenes are really good. The side characters are good. Like, for me, this was just going into the cinema. I was just so entertained for the whole film. And I was like, this just feels like this is what Marvel could achieve every time if I feel like they gave maybe a little bit more kind of creative control to some of the directors. That was something I kind of had a bit of an issue with Black Panther. Going back to that, was that I feel like it could have been more that director's work. But Thor Ragnarok does not suffer from that at all. It's just really entertaining, really fun, and it's a great Taika Waititi film as well as a great Marvel film. So for that reason, I just really appreciate it, and it definitely deserves a spot on my list.
Yeah, I can't really argue with you having Thor Ragnarok at your number 5. It's a great film, and I'd say that it's easily one of my favourite films in the franchise as well. For a second, I did think that it was going to be in my top 5 because I do love Waititi as a director. I love his style of filmmaking, just like you. Hunt for the Wilder People might be one of my favourite films of all time. So yeah, I did for a second think that Thor Ragnarok would make it into my top 5, but there are certain elements of the film that over time have become more apparent for me. Like, I do wish that some of the more emotional moments in the film were given some time to rest. There are a few emotional scenes throughout, and instead of letting us sit with the emotion, Waititi hits us with a joke. And he does it even in like the closing minutes of the film after something that's really quite huge and quite emotional has happened. But that is only just a few moments in the film, and really it is just a minor issue I have with Thor Ragnarok. Like I said, I do think this is a really good film. I think it's a really good pick for your number 5, and it does probably land towards the top of my top 10, but because of some of those issues, I just couldn't place it in my top 5. And speaking of my top 5, I'll just jump into my 5th favourite Marvel film, and I've got The Avengers, and I've got The Avengers in my number 5 spot for one very obvious and kind of really undeniable reason, and that's that I think it's one of the most badass and just awesome films of all time. And as a kid growing up reading comics and watching the animated shows, I never thought in a million years that I'd see someone bring all of these superheroes together in one movie in the same way that they always did in the comics. For me, what Joss Whedon was able to do with this film and with these characters is nothing short of kind of amazing. And I actually think that The Avengers is one of the most impressive things that a major Hollywood franchise has ever done, because on paper, The Avengers is a film that just shouldn't work for so many different reasons. There are too many characters, there's way too much story to tell, but somehow everything just worked perfectly. All of the characters worked well together and bounced off of each other in a really cool way, and it never felt like the film slowed down or got boring, which is always a good thing. Probably my favourite thing about The Avengers is that Whedon managed to make the film without making any of the characters the main character. Like, I think it would have been so easy to make Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man the main character of this film, but I loved how Marvel and Whedon kind of gave each character a piece of the spotlight, and that resulted in this really cool experience where everyone who saw the film walked out with a new favourite character. I remember seeing The Avengers with a group of friends from high school, and when we were talking about the film afterwards and talking about the characters, each of us pretty much had a different Avenger as our favourite, and that's a really cool and unique experience that wouldn't have been possible if Whedon didn't give every character a decent moment to shine. And yeah, that's just a few of the many reasons why The Avengers is my 5th favourite Marvel film.
So that's a great pick for your number 5, because my number 4 pick is also The Avengers. I completely agree with what you said about the balancing of the characters. That's one of my favourite things about the film, is just the way that this is a superhero movie. It's all about the superheroes, not just one, but like all of the characters we've met so far, and then, if I remember, a few that we've barely even met at that point. And by the end of it, you've had so many cool moments with each of the different characters that, like you say, you kind of started finding some new favourites as well. I really liked Hawkeye, particularly. Just some of his sort of little moments were really, really well done, and Jeremy Renner brought a lot to the role, and particularly the sort of sequences that you get where you sort of see the big battles, where you sort of see his arrows sort of flying across, and then that cut, like not even cuts, that like zooms to another character. Those sequences are like, that's like comic book movie filmmaking done just like absolutely perfectly right, and you've got the kind of iconic scenes where they're all stood around in a circle fighting. Yeah, I liked Whedon's contributions a lot. I thought he brought his classic sort of wittiness to the film. Really perfect fit for the Marvel universe. Yeah, it's just the big superhero movie, and that's why I have to include it in my top 5.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much more about it because I did just spend a few minutes talking about how much I love it, but I just want to say that I completely agree with everything you said, especially about Joss Whedon being the perfect fit for an Avengers movie. His writing style from shows like Buffy, Angel, Firefly, stuff like that, it just seems to work for these characters who, they're all kind of different and they don't get on very well. Whedon is great at writing witty banter, so those character building moments on the helicarrier were really great to watch, because Whedon did such a great job of showing how each character would interact and bounce off of the others. So yeah, just wanted to say that I completely agree with you, and now I'll get into my number 4, which is Captain America Civil War. And I think the main reason I love this film so much is that it's kind of a culmination of everything that we saw in the previous Avengers films, in the 2 other Captain America movies, and pretty much the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe so far. The Russo brothers took 2 of the most beloved characters of all time, and they really took that friendship between Cap and Iron Man, and they just kind of stripped it all down in a really cool and interesting way. When I talk about my love of this film, the thing that I usually talk about the most is how impressed I am with the Russo brothers and their ability to tell a story and fit all of these superheroes into one movie. When I talked about the Avengers earlier, I mentioned how impressed I was with Joss Whedon for being able to fit all of those characters in one movie. And when you look at Captain America Civil War, it has so many more heroes and more characters, and somehow everyone still seems like they have a purpose. Every character still gets a moment to shine, but the spotlight is still firmly set on Captain America and his development and his story. Civil War is this really big Avengers scale action story, and it's introducing Black Panther, it's introducing Spider-Man, you've got more story with Iron Man, more story with Black Widow and Hawkeye and all of the Avengers and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, the Russo brothers constructed the film so that we still get this really emotional and heartfelt Captain America film, and I still don't really understand how anyone managed to fit all of that into one film and make that film good. So yeah, it's just stuff like the more emotional side of Captain America's story and his relationship with Bucky, mixed with all of the Avengers stuff that just makes Captain America Civil War my fourth favourite Marvel film.
I'm kind of mixed on Civil War, but it's mostly good, I'd say. Like, it's mostly positives that I can say about it, because I do really like the continuation of the political intrigue from Winter Soldier. I think that there's such a great element of what is specifically the Captain America film. So it may have introduced all these new characters, some really good ones, obviously, and done this really well and had this more expansive side, but it was still a Captain America film in tone, and I think that was what was really interesting about it, is that sometimes Marvel films can get kind of samey in a way where it's like you can't really tell the difference between one or the other, but then you see Civil War and you realise, no wait, Captain America films do have a certain feel, and I did really enjoy it the first time I saw it in the cinema, but on reflection, I just don't feel like it went far enough. It wasn't game-changing enough for me. I think Civil Dispute became the sort of nickname for it, which is what it does well. It does really, really well, but I just didn't feel like it had enough punch to sort of really have a lasting impact on me. But I still enjoy it. But yeah, so I'll get on to my number 3 spot. This is my controversial choice. It is Iron Man 3. And I really like Iron Man 3. It's not an Iron Man film, it's a Tony Stark film. And I just think that decision, that Iron Man in the first place in his first film, a lot of people were thinking, well, who's Iron Man? I always loved Iron Man. He was another one of my childhood favourites. So I was really happy when he got a film, but a lot of people were like, what about, Spider-Man? Why aren't they getting him? And it's like, well, there's rights involved. But other than that, it was still a very risky thing to do, making an Iron Man film as your kind of flagship. And that's why Iron Man 3 is even more risky, because it's actually saying, how invested are you in this character? Are you willing to watch a full film of him just kind of being him? And I guess it would go either way for people, but I just really, really liked it. I thought they dealt with kind of like combat PTSD really well for a Marvel film. Obviously, it's nothing too deep, but I still appreciated the way that they showed this mighty hero of America, but he's got these issues from what he's done, and that's like, you don't really see that much in a comic book film. It's more the kind of thing you'd expect from a DC. It gets a bit ridiculous at the end, obviously. I'm not really a big fan of the last half an hour. It just starts things just start exploding everywhere, and there's loads of people who are lava and stuff, and that lost me. But I just really loved the fact that it's a superhero film about someone who physically isn't a superhero, but it's about his strength and about his sort of mental and moral will that drives him through. So it's like, even without his powers, he is Tony Stark is truly a great hero. He's not just this selfish guy who sort of hides behind technology. He's a real man, and a complex one at that. And I just think that was very, very daring for them. A lot of my favourite Marvel films are daring, and this is kind of the best example of that, I guess. So that's why I put it at my number 3 spot.
I'm guessing that you figured you'd be getting some backlash on this one, because I know that I'm not very fond of this film. But in a lot of ways, I do agree with what you said. Pretty much all of the reasons you love Iron Man 3 are the reasons I think it's not a total failure. The character development and the way it goes under the armor and explores Tony instead of just Iron Man. I really like all of that stuff, and rewatching the film this week, I think my appreciation of the film was raised, because I did enjoy the film more looking at those elements after kind of discussing it with you a few times. But I can't look past the terrible final act. You said the last 30 minutes are a bit of a mess, and for me, that twist completely, it just ruins the film. I honestly think that if they had just kept Ben Kingsley as the villain, the film could have been really good and could have been a really awesome ending to Iron Man's trilogy. But for some reason, Marvel and Shane Black decided to go for the joke and lead us into a cheesy and messy final act, which it kind of ruined all of the good stuff that they set up in the first 2 acts. correct. I do like this film. I don't think there's a single Marvel film that I dislike or hate, but I do think Iron Man 3 could have been so much better if they had just kept on that great path that they set up with the first two acts of the film. But with that said, I do agree with your points. I understand why it's in your top 5, and I'll just move on to my number 3, which is Guardians of the Galaxy. And this is easily one of the strangest, wackiest, and one of the most incredible adventures, not only in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but of all time. I remember how worried I was before this film came out because that's how much I care about this franchise. I wasn't confident in Guardians of the Galaxy, even though the trailers and the footage did look amazing. In a lot of ways, I think it would have been kind of crazy if I wasn't worried about Guardians of the Galaxy, right? I mean, it's got a talking raccoon and a talking tree thing, so it wasn't like it was a sure thing for Marvel. But then the reviews came out and they were incredible. I think it was one of the best reviewed Marvel films of all time. But still, I wanted to wait until I saw the movie myself, and for me, I think James Gunn just hit it out of the park with this film. Guardians of the Galaxy is just such a fun, emotional, crazy, wacky, mad, colourful, bonkers film, and the characters are all incredible. It does a great job of expanding the cosmic side of the MCU, and it was completely different from anything that we'd seen before. And I'm just going to say something that I think I've said on here before, but for me, even though this isn't my personal favourite Marvel film, I do think that when people look back at this franchise in 50 or 100 years, Guardians of the Galaxy will probably be the film that they look back on and still talk about. I think this will easily become the most iconic series in the MCU because if you look at the fandom surrounding Guardians of the Galaxy, the film has already grown a massive cult following and it's managed to become one of the most beloved films of all time. And I think in a lot of ways even it's kind of become like the new Star Wars for a new generation, which in itself is an unbelievable and crazy and incredible thing. And it's just a great film. So yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is my third favourite Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
Yeah, so I kind of expected that this would be quite high on your list because I know quite a few, well, not like quite a few people, but there are certain few people I know who are just like, they had that kind of Star Wars effect, the first time you see Star Wars with Guardians. I completely see why it has that effect. I think I've spoken a bit about it before, where personally I'm on the kind of stance where I really respect the film and I really appreciate it as a Marvel film, and I love how different it sort of was to earlier installments, but I think it's just for me, I just a lot of it's very based on humor, and I didn't the humor doesn't quite gel with me, I guess, but bits of it are great. I mean, I love Drax, like there's no sort of messing about there. But yeah, I mean, I've spoken about Guardians before, I think, so I'll probably just quickly go on to number 2, which is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This was my number 1 Marvel film for quite a while. I really like the way that it works with these undercurrents of political intrigue, like I was saying about Civil War before, but I think Winter Soldier really kind of sort of nails that, where it presents an organization as the villain rather than just one person, and the idea that they are this incredibly insidious force who just kind of work in the shadows and you never know where they're actually going to strike. And the whole twist in the last sort of act is just, I think it's the last act or maybe halfway point of the film, just it completely throws the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we know up until now, into sort of complete chaos, because we've been very reliant on S.H.I.E.L.D. being this organization that exists, and they've got this sort of certain sense of power that's kind of rooting the kind of superhuman kind of heroes with the government. So obviously that's how Civil War certainly sort of comes to be. It's the direct results of Winter Soldier. It's such sort of a catalyst movie. And more than that, it's just a really good political thriller. I really enjoy the way the plot develops, and I love the kind of Cold War-esque sort of feel that it's got going on. It's like drawing on earlier American kind of combat history, warfare history, and applying it to the modern day, which I guess is something that makes a lot of sense for Captain America, because I mean, he missed out on the Cold War being cold, funnily enough. But now he's kind of, getting to see what it was like a bit. So I like that sort of bringing a bit of history into it as well. Yeah, it's just a really solid film. It's not quite, a kind of genre-busting kind of masterpiece as The Dark Knight, which really is just an incredible film in its own right, beyond sort of any kind of sort of genre. But it's nonetheless, it's incredibly solid and entertaining, and it's just got some great character moments, some great character introductions, and I just think it stands solid as just sort of film in its own right as well. So I've got to give it props, and that's why it's my number 2.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, but I'm not going to talk about Captain America the Winter Soldier right now, just because it does appear a little bit higher on my list, so I'll talk about it more in a couple of minutes. But yeah, I just want to say I completely agree with your points. You were pretty much spot on with everything, so yeah, good pick. Alright, so I'll move on to my number 2, and I've actually got Black Panther, and I'm basically just going to sum up what I said in our review last week, which was that, in my opinion, this film reached a whole new level of storytelling for this franchise. This was the first Marvel film that made me think about life and society and family, and I also think that it's just one of the most emotional and raw superhero films that we've ever seen. I don't think it's quite on the level of The Dark Knight and Logan, but it's certainly closer to that level than some of the other Marvel films. Black Panther isn't just another action blockbuster, not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me Black Panther is more important, and it's a character-driven film about a young man with an impossible responsibility, which is the throne of Wakanda, and he has to balance that responsibility with his duties as Black Panther, and not to mention the fact that all of this is just happening days or weeks after his dad died. So to me, this film explored deeper and more interesting themes than what we usually see in Marvel films, and it just works on so many different levels for me. The performances are incredible, the visuals are beautiful, it's got a great score, Michael B. Jordan was a great villain, it's got some of the best action we've ever seen in this franchise, and I've not even mentioned what this film has done and will do for representation. So yeah, Black Panther is at my number 2 right now. If you do want to hear our full review, I guess you can go back and check that out from last week, but that's it for my number 2.
Yeah, so I'll say the same like where we're at. I won't really voice too much my opinion because we've got the whole review. So guys, check out our other review, shameless plug. But I will say this, that I was very mixed on it, but I have still been thinking about it after having seen it. So I've been thinking about a lot of the stuff that it has to say about society, and I really, really do like that whole side of it. But I was still quite mixed on it. But I'll go straight to my number 1 spot. I think I've said this before at some point. It's kind of a weird pick, but I was compiling the list and then kind of going over it, and I was like, I stand by this. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I'm not really sure, like, even sort of how to explain how much I appreciated this film, because it was quite a weird experience. Like I say, a lot of the humour didn't work in the first one for me, and the second one isn't really any different humour-wise, and I think because I wasn't that sort of taken in with the first one, I know, for example, you and one of our other uni mates weren't a huge fan of it because you were such a big fan of the first one. It felt like a letdown, kind of. And I can understand that, and I think it is very different to the first one. But I wasn't that big a fan of the first one, so for some reason this one turned that on its head. It turned out to be the film that I like the most in the MCU. All of that sort of infectious sort of fun from the first one, not necessarily the sort of funny, but just the whole sense of sort of adventure was still there, and I really appreciated that. But it just went so deep with the characters. It gave us these incredible character moments that just I haven't seen in another Marvel film that have actually kind of affected me like that. It's really good screenwriting is what I think it is. It's a really solid script where, I'm not going to say too much about some parts of the story because it does get a little bit ridiculous in the third act. I guess that's kind of the same thing I said about Iron Man 3, but it still applies. That I kind of looked beyond all the kind of like action and pacing, and I just saw this character-driven drama about these sort of weirdos trying to find their place in the world and trying to understand what they're all about, and one of them's meeting a member of his family who he didn't even know who he was before. And there's just this one moment, I don't want to sort of give too many spoilers because some people might not have seen it, like a few plot details, all right, but this is quite a big deal. But basically, one character finds out something else about another character, and there's no standing around going, what? How could you? No, like, Luke Skywalker or whatever. He literally pulls his gun out and shoots the other character in the face. Like, that is a character-defining moment, right? Like right there. That I just thought that moment was just brilliant. There's so many great goofy sort of moments in it as well, beyond all the sort of like really sort of powerful and poignant stuff. There's a great bit with David Hasselhoff, just for a split second, that's just so weird, and I loved those little elements as well. And also Drax is brilliant. I mean, he's just always great, and I think he's even better in this one because reminds me of the same thing as Thor Ragnarok, where Thor's learnt from the people he's hung out with. He's no longer this super serious guy. He's cracking jokes. He's developed more of his own personality, and Drax is like that now. And I appreciate character development. I appreciate risk taking. I appreciate the possibility of character deaths actually kind of being final. Again, no spoilers regarding that, but that was such a sort of powerful moment, and it was all a product of just this really well written screenplay involving these characters, and it all paid off beat after beat. And I don't know, I just really appreciated that, I guess. So when I think about my favorite MCU film, I just kind of go to Guardians 2 for some reason. Yeah, so that's why it's my number one pick.
Yeah, I suspected that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 would be in your top 5, but honestly I didn't think it would reach your number 1 spot. I do know how much you love that film, but I didn't realise you love it that much. And like you said, I do have some issues with the film, but I can't really argue with your decision after hearing some of your points. Rewatching the film back this week, I did like it a lot more, I'll say that. I do still have a lot of issues with it. I think the final act was a bit messy. I didn't really like the villain much at all. Some of the comedy was a bit off for me, like the Pac-Man scene and a few other moments, and I do think that the film lacked the emotional backbone that made the first one so good. To me, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 kind of feels like James Gunn looked at the reviews of the first film and saw that people really liked the comedy, so he put more comedy into this one, but by doing that he sacrificed a lot of the heartfelt and emotional moments that made the first one so good. But saying that, I do think that this film did a good job of delving into the characters and exploring them as individuals and also as a family and a team. And I don't mean to say that the film completely lacks emotion, because it definitely doesn't. That one scene between Mantis and Drax gets me every time, and then the moment you talked about was just heartbreaking and then immediately awesome. So while Guardians 2 isn't my favourite Marvel film, I definitely appreciate it, and I do agree with some of the points that you made, and I can see why someone else would love it, but for me there are just a few of those issues. So I guess I'll just move on to my number 1, and I've got Captain America the Winter Soldier, which I guess I kind of spoiled earlier in the episode, but oh well. I will admit that I was struggling to decide between The Winter Soldier and Black Panther for my number 1 spot, and maybe after some reflection time Black Panther will reach this ranking, but right now Captain America the Winter Soldier is still my favourite MCU film. For me, The Winter Soldier isn't just a great superhero movie, it's a great film, and I actually would place it among Logan and The Dark Knight as one of the best films from the genre. Everything about this film just works. We get great character development, we get a more serious tone, which is a nice change for the franchise, and I'd put Bucky and Pierce up there as two of Marvel's best villains. I will admit that I might be slightly biased because Captain America is my favourite Avenger and probably my second favourite hero after Superman. But looking back at the film and rewatching the whole franchise, it did become obvious that this is still my favourite MCU film, just because we do get to delve deeper into Captain America as a character, we see more about who he is, what he's fighting for, and what his place is in this universe. This isn't just another popcorn flick. The Winter Soldier does have real consequences for the larger universe, and there are some serious and darker elements to the film that help make it a more intriguing and memorable story. I think that the emotional story that the Russo brothers told about Steve and Bucky's friendship was one of the better ones that we've seen in this franchise, and I'll admit that whenever I hear someone say that I'm with you till the end of the line, I do tear up just a little bit. And finally, I think The Winter Soldier is just an incredibly well-made, intriguing and emotional film, and honestly, I don't think the MCU would be where it is today without this film. It marked a tonal change in the franchise, and it set up where the entire MCU is heading now going into Avengers Infinity War. And I guess that's it for my top 5 MCU films, but before I wrap this episode up, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Just that it's an incredibly good pick for number 1. Yeah, like all the stuff, like the reason why it's sort of so good, or a good way of showing how good it is a lot of the stuff that you said about it wasn't even the same stuff that I was saying about how much I liked it. There's a lot of good in that film, so I mean, I imagine we could probably keep speaking about that film for ages. The more we sort of remember bits of it, I need to see it again some point soon. So yeah, I mean, I'd kind of say it's my joint number one. I can't really pick too much. It's just I had to choose one. I went with Guardians. But yeah, it's one of the best Marvel films. There's no question about it. So good pick, man.
Alright guys, that's it for our top 5 MCU movies. Make sure you let us know how you'd rank the franchise in the comment section below. Please like and share this video. Head over to iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher or YouTube and subscribe. And I guess we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, have a good one, guys.